Kia ora Aotearoa, good evening and welcome to the Union Report, where we review the news week through the lens of industrial disputes with union leaders, commentators and politicians. Joining me tonight to discuss events is the Council of Trade Unions President Helen Kelly and the President of the Maritime Union of New Zealand, Gary Parslow. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, what is driving the conflict at the ports of Auckland? Where is the middle ground? And how many dirty tricks does POAL need to play? Issue 2, AFCO says they want the union out of their industry. Will these tactics enshrine a low-wage economy? And if our primary industries can't provide decent wages, what industry can? Issue 3, this Saturday is International Workers' Memorial Day, and 6 months since the death of Charanpreet Dawal on the Fulton Hogan worksite. Is a de-unionised workforce a safe workforce? And we'll wrap the show with a final thought and preview upcoming events. But let's start tonight with issue 1. The latest chapter of the Ports of Auckland dispute is seeing both parties off to the Employment Relations Authority. But what is the real agenda here? Gary, the port says they want a 160-hour roster over 28 days. Is that casualisation? How does that impact your members?
Yeah, it is. They've only introduced the 160 hours. They brought that in very late in the piece. Early on in the piece it wasn't even there. We've tried to seek exactly how they see that fitting in. But at the end of the day, what the port company was is everybody in a group, in a basket, call on people as they need them. As they don't need them, they won't get work. And I'm not too sure how that 160 will fit in because they don't seem to know themselves.
Right. How does that impact your members? I mean, walk us through, for them, week to week, how does that impact them?
Well, if there was 160 over 40 and they were getting 8 hours a day and 40 hours in a week or something, well then we wouldn't have a problem with any of that. If it's compounded up to some degree to fix the shipping, we probably wouldn't have a problem with that either. But when we're asked how it fits in explicitly, how it would be, when we'd have to turn up, when we'd know our next shift is, they're unable to answer that, other than we will call on you when we need you, and when we don't need you, you'll sit at home and wait.
At what point is flexibility backsnapping? Because it seems that the issues they're wanting are just ones you can't make.
Yeah, well, they argue a lot of things. They want the greater number of people there, obviously, when the ships are in port, and they want less and less when they're not. And we offered them that in the mediation. We said to them, well, we'll extend our shifts at the time. We'll go to 8 hours, 10 hours. We'll do whatever's required. We talked to them about maybe penal rates fitting into that, so they could have what they want, we could have what we wanted somewhere in there. We got very close at that occasion, but he just said at the time it wasn't good enough. He wanted total control and flexibility of the hours of the people he employs.
Helen, does good faith bargaining need to be reviewed so that the outcome has to be evaluated alongside the process? Because some of the Ports of Auckland stunts to date seem more blind faith than good faith. Advertising for jobs before the process is over isn't good faith, is it?
Yeah, well, there's two things. Firstly, the port probably hasn't complied with the current good faith requirements, and obviously that's going to the court soon, and the port's done everything it can to put off that court case, and I'm not surprised given how they behaved. But secondly, yeah, the Employment Relations Act focuses only on process, not outcomes, and the outcomes are that only 9% of the private sector actually enjoy a collective employment agreement when they walk into work every day. The international right to collective bargaining and freedom of association sits up there writ large, but the reality for many, many workers is union membership is a risk, not a right. And for those that do access it, even the most staunchly unionised like the ports, all the dirty tricks can come into play to undermine that collective bargaining and avoid it.
So is that something that a government needs to look at? I mean, if we're serious about egalitarianism in New Zealand, surely the outcomes have to be as fair as the process.
Yeah, honestly, you can have a look at the growing gap between rich and poor in this country, and it directly correlates, particularly the poor are getting a larger group, with the decline in collective bargaining. Around the world, it correlates with the decline in collective bargaining, and that is a deliberate strategy by those that own the wealth to undermine collective bargaining, undermine unions, and get rid of union organisation. Now, the meatworks and the ports are, really the bastions of unionisation in this country, the last remaining big groups to be collectively bargaining in the private sector, and that's why they're after them. They've got rid of unionisation with the truckies, they've got rid of unionisation largely with foreign crews on ships. The port is sitting there in the middle of the supply chain, and they want those workers, they want to basically remove their rights and make them accountable only to the port, rather than to have a balance with their family life and all the other things.
Gary, the Productivity Commission report into making our ports more competitive internationally noted that the real gains in lowering costs was in the fees the shipping lines charge us, not employment relations at the port. What do you think is actually driving this dispute, economics or ideology?
Well, it's a race to the bottom of the charges in the port. I mean, big shipping company like Maersk will come into Auckland. They'll get a rate for the cost of tying, berthing. They'll get a crane rate. They'll get a rate for everything else, and then they'll go down to Tauranga and they'll undercut that rate with the Tauranga port. If they can get it right, they'll take the ship from Auckland down there. It's for some reason, as the port companies around the country, and the same between Lyttelton and Dunedin.
Yep.
And Port Chalmers, that somewhere around the line somebody's got to stand up and say this is a rate for a box, or this is a rate of the costs getting it in and out.
Yeah.
That's where our container rates in New Zealand, everything is so cheap compared to anywhere else in the world, because they're predating the rate down.
Right.
And all that's doing is driving everything down, and that turns the port company, turns them against the workers, because where else can they go to get their value, get their wage costs and that. So at some stage of the game, we've got to stop letting the foreign ship owners dictate the rates in the ports.
Right.
These port
You know, they're exempted from the Commerce Act. Ship owners, they're allowed to collaborate together and fix the price in New Zealand. They're the only industry exempted from the Commerce Act, and the Productivity Commission found that they're actually doing that, fixing the price, driving down port costs, and what we need is a national strategy around port use, who can do what, which is the best way to maximise how ships come in and out, which ports should be developed and invest in infrastructure and new plant and all of that. But obviously they're all competing with each other. This is the result.
So we've got a fake competition that's actually detrimental to the people working in the industry.
That's right. It's not even a market, because the ships are able to collaborate and drive down prices.
Right. Helen, how does leaking personal employee details to a far-right blog site help build a positive employment environment for workers? And are those gutter tactics what Aucklanders expect from a company they own?
Well, I don't think they expect it from anybody, but I'll tell you one thing that's interesting. So yes, the port went absolutely below the radar, leaked out this private information of a vulnerable family who lost their mum. I mean, you can't imagine painting a better picture in terms of a port that is duplicitous and underhand, and to a right-wing blog site who then attracted all this, horrible comments about this family.
Yeah, pretty
But it is interesting, isn't it, that everybody's outraged by that. You get the mayor saying, bottom line, someone will have to go if it's proved to be the port. What about the plan to sack everyone and replace them? Why isn't society as outraged about that?
Right.
And the breaches of good faith and all of that.
Right.
That seems to be acceptable. 1,000 families locked out at AFCO. Why aren't people screaming? One family has locked out 1,000. And why isn't the community as outraged about that as the privacy leaks, which are below the belt and terrible as well? But
question to both of you. Len Brown came to power off the backs of many working class voters. Has his lack of leadership, do you think, damaged that working class vote?
Yes, it has. I know a lot of the unions are very disappointed in him. We expected him to stand up to the plate a wee bit more and take a more positive position over it. The argument around that he's too far removed doesn't sit too well with us. He is the custodian of the city. He's the custodian of the port. And I thought it was all a little bit too much when they come out with a ludicrous statement that the port should be returning 12%.
Well, that's just insane, isn't it?
Well, there's not a port in the world that gets 12%.
No.
They get in 2s and 3s in Australia, and we're returning 6% here. And that's 6% on the back of a very productive port that puts all the revenue into Auckland, all the productivity. The manufacturing is only growing because the port's there. The factories only grow there. It creates massive employment because it's there. And on top of all that growth and money it's tipping in, it's getting 6%. And I'd like to get 12% on my money in a bank or somewhere. It's just a ridiculous figure.
Wasn't Hanover promising 12% in the returns, wasn't
just
it?
Ridiculous.
Len's got to take some of the responsibility here, doesn't he? I mean, pushing for 12% was just insane.
Sure, him and the council, they set the port up to allow it to do what it was doing, to justify its action. But actually, the people that have really got to take accountability here are the port management and the port board. I mean, you think about what they said about their little adventure, completely failed, unprincipled to start off with, to think they could dismiss their workforce and replace them, highly skilled workers and good, strong, loyal workers. But also, it's turned into a disaster. That port was shut for weeks and weeks. The people of Auckland, the businesses of Auckland, they've all lost money. And what, they're just allowed to carry on? No accountability? No responsibility? I mean, they're paid a lot of money and they've stuffed it up, and they should be held to account.
Final question here. What happens if the POAL walks away from arbitration and once again sacks everyone, Gary?
Well, going along with what Helen said, I just wonder where they're getting all this money from and where all this accountability comes from, because the redundancy packages for 300 odd watersiders running from anywhere from 40,000 to 80,000 runs into millions and millions of dollars. They'll have to pay all that out. then those people, the younger people, will head off to Australia, get jobs on the Fremantle waterfront, the Brisbane waterfront. They'll get remunerated more attractively. They'll have be working for an employer that's not an absolute bully like this one is. And at the end of the day, then they've got to come back and train all those other people to take these jobs up again, and that's millions and millions of dollars. So I don't know where all this money's coming from.
Is that how we're going to catch up with Australia, by having our workers move there?
Well, it might be the only way.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2, another dispute, another company making the lives of working people miserable, this time at AFCO, with 1,000 meat workers locked out for over 2 months. Helen, it's the second term of a hard-right National Party government. Are employers just trying it on now? Because the image of Tallies, one of New Zealand's richest families, screwing over meat workers to maximise profit, shouldn't sit well with New Zealand's view of egalitarian country, should it?
No, it shouldn't, and this is a very, very cruel dispute. Actually, there are over 1,300 families affected by this. Over 5,000 children are part of those families that are locked out. They live in places like Wairoa and Wanganui, in the far north, you know, some of our poorest communities, and they've worked loyally and hard for AFCO. Suddenly the Tally Groups takes over these companies, and they're up against it. They're trying to control the mechanism that sets a big portion of their pay, and they've locked them out now for over 50 days. It's a very strong deunionisation tactic. They're offering workers individual contracts to come back to work, and those workers, oh, you should see them, Bomber. They've cashed up their KiwiSavers. They've, you know, suspended their mortgages. They're selling their cars. You know, this is a really very, very cruel dispute. The irony is, over 60% of them are Māori. Tallies are making their money out of the land and the sea that once fed Māori people in this country,
pretty
you know, one family being able to impact on so many. It's wrong.
Gary, Munns had to deal with a dirty online smears campaign by right-wing bloggers. The Meat Workers Union are now facing the same tactics and have had a complaint by the Serious Fraud Office rejected. How do unions compete against this style of online attack, and do you see public relations companies playing dirtier and dirtier tactics?
Well, what we had to do when all the nonsense was coming out about us, we had to get out into the media. We went to the newspapers and put a page in different newspapers. We got on the radio, we got on all of those things because we needed to get our message out there, because at the end of the day, we didn't think the people of Auckland were naive enough to believe some of this misinformation. I mean, to say on a website or a blog site that we all get $97,000 for 20 hours a week work, well, I mean, if that was the case, then everybody in New Zealand would have me doing their agreements for them, because it's just an absolute nonsense. There's nothing in there about them working back-to-back 16-hour days and all the things to get that sort of money. So I think we needed to, and we did. We got out there and got our message across, and I think the people of Auckland now understand it all and understand we're just dealing with a bully.
From what I heard, some of your members' wives, when they heard that their husbands was apparently earning 97,000, wanted to know where the other 37,000 was.
Yeah, they said it'd be nice if we got it. I mean, in our mediation, when he talked about, I said, well, we'll take a $10,000 a year wage decrease if you like, and work twice as many hours, because people just aren't earning that money. I mean, $27, you can do the arithmetic yourself, you know, and most of them down there get a good year, they might get 70,000, but they're working overtime for that. Anybody getting 90 has to do 16-hour days. That was never put on anywhere. It's misinformation all the time.
Yeah, they're pretty good at that. Helen, Alliance Group Limited, the second largest meat workers, signed a deal with the Meat Workers Union that included a 3% pay rise. This isn't about work or pay conditions at AFCO, is it? They have stated they want the union out of their business. Gordon McLaughlin, author of The Passionless People and the Spirit Level book on equality, both conclude the best way to overcome poverty is stronger unions. If Tallies want the union out of their business, what does that say about workers' rights?
Yeah, and all of information suggests that as the gap between rich and poor have grown, there's a direct correlation with the decline in collective bargaining. And only 9% of New Zealanders are collective bargaining in this country, and the reality is, as we, you know, the outcomes of the Employment Relations Act have not delivered freedom of association and collective bargaining to thousands and thousands of workers. So here we go. We're right in the premium supply chain. Meat, you know, meat prices at an all-time high, and you've got one company that is determined to deunionise. And of course, the impact of that on us, if they win, is that other companies will come under pressure to drive down wages as well. And so it's a very, very serious dispute for the union movement to win, to support these AFCO workers, apart from the fact that there are 1,300 families directly affected.
If AFCO's point is to get the union out of their business, how can you good faith bargain with that?
Well, it comes down to how they do that. I mean, if they tick the boxes and pretend that that's what they're doing, it's very hard. And if they're offering workers individual agreements and the option is to stay locked out and to lose your home and to lose everything else, then the temptation for those workers is to take those agreements and go back to work.
Of course.
And we've got a lot of very staunch workers there who are not going to do that, but we need public support to win this dispute. We need Māori to stand up and say we will not supply AFCO, we will not give tallies our fishing quota, we will not send our animals to these AFCO plants. We need the community to say we won't buy tally products. We want to make it very, very clear that we want to support these workers. So there are other avenues we need to win this dispute.
Gary, meat of course is one of our primary products, and the prices for those primary products have never been so high. AFCO made a $20 million profit last year. If these industries can't generate a decent living wage for New Zealand workers, what industry can?
Yeah, well, that's if watersiders and meat workers and that can't get a decent living out of the industry they're in, well, then the rest of the trade union movement is buggered, for want of a better word. But having said that, it seems to me at Tallies that it seems to almost be a crime to have a decent job. I mean, everything I read about it and see about it, they don't want much at all. They just want a decent living, and yet Tallies pick it up and it's a crime to have a decent job. If they're making 20 million and doing that, what is the harm in giving their workers decent conditions and looking after them?
It is interesting, isn't it, that the idea is that the blue-collar wage worker can't aspire to a decent wage in this country, and that somehow you've got to be white-collar if you actually want to succeed.
Yeah, it seems to be, everywhere you go, there seems to be driving down the wages and conditions of those blue-collar workers, and I think employers are just heartened and emboldened by the fact there's a second term of the national government, and the indications are that they will attack industrial relations again and make them more draconian. So I see them all being, as I say, heartened by that, and they want to attack everybody.
Question of both. Oh, yeah.
Well, the reality is, if the government had brought in the laws it's intending to bring in, changes to the Employment Relations Act, if they had been in place when the port attacked the wharfies, then the wharfies would not have won the right to return to work, because the duty to conclude, technical term, which the government is talking about removing, would have meant the port could have walked away from bargaining and contracted out those workers. So if people support the wharfies, they need to watch these law changes and realise how dangerous they are.
Question to both of you. If workers keep having their conditions reduced, aren't we locked into a low-wage economy? And isn't that where we're going to go?
Yeah, that's where we'll all end up, and that's why we're having the arguments now on the waterfront and with the meat workers. People don't want to race to the bottom. No. People want a decent living wage to look after their families, and it's nothing much to ask for.
Are we locked into a low-wage economy? I mean,
for
Bill English was boasting about it, wasn't it?
For many, many workers, their reality is a low-wage economy, and that's why it is important that we restore rights to collectively bargain, and that wages, you should be able to work, and at the end of the week, you should have the money to pay the bills, to take your kids out for the weekend, to pay for your rent and those basic things. That's what work is for, and we're losing that story.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3. This Saturday is International Workers' Memorial Day, and 6 months since the death of Charanpreet Dhaliwal on a Fulton Hogan work site. Helen, the union movement has been built on lifting safety standards because no one should die at work. The horrific story here, however, raises massive questions about how Fulton Hogan actually trained him on the night of his death, doesn't it?
Sure. Fulton Hogan had a building site in Henderson that had been burgled a couple of times. They decided to put security in place, so they went to a very, very small security company without, in our view, checking out whether that security company was a good and safe employer. Charanpreet rang on the day he was murdered. He rang that employer and asked for some work, C&E Security, and was told there was no work, coming tomorrow for an interview. As it turned out, a young man who was meant to do the shift that night, it was his birthday, he asked for the night off. The boss said sure, rang Charanpreet back, got him to work on that site, met him there at 10:30 at night. The birthday boy showed him around for 10 minutes, left him with the keys, a high-vis vest and a tiny torch that he brought along himself, and by 4 in the morning he was dead on his first night at work on a trial. And you could say, well, what was that security company doing? You know, did they tell him not to approach anybody on that site? Did they show him where the risk was? Should he have been there on their own? Was there decent lighting? Whatever. But in the end, you can say who benefited from his work that night? It was Fulton Hogan. They were the ones that should have taken responsibility for making sure that that 21-year-old kid survived that night's work and was safe. And we've raised this with them. They have, you know, refused really to engage in this issue.
It's an incredible situation, though.
It's an outrageous situation. I'll tell you what, Bomber, Joseph Dunbar, 17 years old, killed in Pike River, a contractor to Pike River, first day at work. Neither of those young men were in a position to raise health and safety concerns if they were in a position to recognise them. Both of them eager to work, took it for granted they would be safe. Neither of them were. And this contracting model basically allows you to remove, and this is what they were trying to do at the ports, to remove the responsibility for health and safety from the beneficial employer, which in the ports case would be the Ports of Auckland, which in the Sharon Preet's case was Fulton Hogan. There's a real problem with the law that allows that sort of responsibility to be contracted out and so easily, and of course it's hugely beneficial to these big companies to not have those responsibilities and those accountabilities.
Because they bring with them costs, right?
They bring with them costs. I tell you, they didn't even put an ACC claim in for Sharon Preet's death to get his body home to his mum. The Sikh community in New Zealand had to fundraise. Fulton Hogan contributed to that, but in my view, not in the way that they should have, and now she's obviously left there in India without her boy.
Unbelievable. Gary, part of the argument in the Ports of Auckland dispute was comparing the safety record of non-unionised Tauranga Port and the Auckland unionised port. Is a de-unionised workforce a safe workforce?
No, we don't think it is. I was on a talkback show at not too long back, and one of the questions coming in on the talkback show, it's all right for using a union, ringing from Tauranga, saying, I don't know when I'm getting my next smoko, I don't know when I'm getting my next lunch, I don't know when I'll be working again. All those things are on people's minds when they go, I'm sitting at home by the phone, what will I do? They're not trained up, they're not skilled enough, they're pulled in as casuals, they're casualised. And at the end of the day, they try and compare us with Tauranga all the time, and yet Tauranga had 5 deaths down there in 15 or 18 months. We've never had any on the Auckland waterfront. Yeah. Why would you want to introduce that into the Auckland? Why would we want to?
If you're in if you aren't unionised and you're working in a workspace, how much security do you think, or do you feel that worker can go to a boss and say, hey, I don't think this is a safe workplace?
Yeah, well, I don't think the boss listens to people at all. I mean, it's very difficult to get a boss to listen to you when you're in a union, and when you got the union backing, very difficult to that on the Auckland waterfront. But having said that, there is a voice. They have the voice of the union. They have the fact that they're all in one collective, the fact that there is terms and conditions in there that gives them some form of security, and they speak with one voice. And but if you're not and you're on your own, nobody listens to you.
Yeah. Question to both of you. Pike River gave us a terrible example of the effects of a deregulated safety regime. Is industry self-regulation on safety standards good enough for New Zealand, or do you think it's a step backwards?
No, we need to do a number of things. Firstly, we need to regulate employment, because what we're talking about here with Sharon Preet is a lack of his ability to speak out, but also a lack of responsibility on the receiving company to make sure he was safe. But secondly, yes, we can't have self-performance around regulation of health and safety. We do need to have decent inspectorates with good prosecutions. I mean, there's a big question, is anyone going to be prosecuted over Sharon Preet's death? And we are pursuing that, but that's still a big question. There's only about another couple of weeks to lay charges against either of those companies. But there does need to be a step up. There is a cultural problem in this country that people think people are lucky to have a job, shouldn't bite the hand that feeds them, and should shut up and put up when they go to work. Now the reality is, if either of those young men had raised a question, they're unlikely to have been employed on those 2 days.
That's right. Self-regulation, it's a joke, isn't it?
Yeah, the question of of safety at work, though, it's absolutely paramount. There shouldn't be any need to start arguing about it. The right of a worker to come home to his family every night is absolutely paramount. Nothing else supersedes that. And every responsible employer should take up that and make sure that his workers are looked after, and that they have a safe working environment, and that they get home safely every night.
Thank you, panel. Let's wrap the show with a final word. Helen, your final word this week is?
Well, I think it's an interesting time in industrial relations in this country. Right here as we speak, we've obviously got 2 major industrial disputes against 2 groups of workers who are, really have fought a hard campaign against the most basic of employment rights. This is not to move us forward. This is not to improve working conditions. This is simply to hang on to the conditions that we've got. How these 2 disputes resolve themselves is a test both of the current employment law, of the government's attitude to working people, and of these employers' attitudes to working people, and whether the community is really prepared to sit by and watch decent working conditions be destroyed. So how our community reacts, particularly in the AFCO dispute now, I think is a sign of how we value work, how we value our communities and how we see our future of work in this country.
Thank you, Gary. Your final word this week?
Yeah, the final word is we just hope that facilitation goes well with the Ports of Auckland. We're not asking for much. There was on the table 10% offer. We've said we'll take 2.5. It's never about money. The people I represent want some form of job security. They just want to know when they're going to work. They want to know what time they'll have off. They want to spend time with their family. It's not all about work either. It's about being able to take the wife out for dinner occasionally or take the young kid to the beach. And you can't do that sitting beside a phone all your life.
Sure.
So we hope that the other side of the table, the Ports of Auckland, see some reason in that, and that we can get an agreement that gives some form of job security as we go forward in our collective.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Gary. Coming up, events-wise, it's International Nurses Day on Saturday, the 12th of May. The New Zealand Nurses Organisation and Service Food Workers Union are running a postcard campaign aimed at Oceania CEO Guy Eadie to gain the money the government have earmarked for aged care. Saturday, May 21st, the PPTA, in coordination with Massey University, are running a series of public meetings on charter schools. And this Friday is a quiz fundraiser for locked out AFCO workers at Education House in Wellington. And of course, this Saturday, the Hikoi against selling off Aotearoa marches in Auckland at 3 p.m. Check out our Facebook site for full event details and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter account for all the latest show updates. Thanks for watching Aotearoa. Join us again 8 p.m. next Monday for the Union Report here on Triangle TV, the home of original public broadcasting. Good night, Aotearoa.